Hi, class. My name is Olivia Dunlop, and the literary term we'll be discussing today is character. So, a character is a person, animal, creature, or being in a story used by an author to perform actions, speak, and create plot. So, in today's lesson, we are going to define the different types of characters, learn to recognize each type of character, and then practice categorizing and creating our own characters with a fun activity. So, first, let's go over the different types of characters and how we recognize them in stories. So, the first type of character is a major character. This is a character who is central to the plot, action, and dialogue of a story. Major characters are almost always complex characters, and they are often also dynamic characters. Some good examples are Jay Gatsby in The Great Gatsby and Mary Lennox in The Secret Garden. Next, we have a minor character. So, this is going to be a character who supports the major characters in the story through dialogue, action, and relationship. Minor characters may also be flat or static characters, but they don't have to be. Some examples are Gollum in The Hobbit and Jane Fairfax in Emma. So next we have a complex character. This is a character who is well developed, has depth of personality, and reacts to external factors in super surprising and unexpected ways. Complex characters are realistic and interesting. They are the opposite of flat characters. These are going to be the characters in the story that you relate best to. You learn a lot about their history, and they're just interesting people. Some examples are Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit and Liesel Meminger in The Book Thief. Next, we have a flat character. This is a character who is one-dimensional. They're typically identified by just a few personality traits, and they have very little depth. You usually don't know a lot about their history. Flat characters are static or stock characters that help to create a realistic setting. They're going to be background characters that help to place the major and complex characters in the story. Some examples are Benvolio in Romeo and Juliet and Mrs. Micawber in David Copperfield. So next we have a protagonist. This could also be called the hero of the story. They're typically defined by good actions and their conflict with the major villain of the story. Plot is created by this conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist, or the hero and the villain. Some good examples are Diana Bishop in The Discovery of Witches and Winston Smith in 1984. Next, we have the antagonist. This is the main villain of the story. They are defined by their conflict with the hero. In some cases, the antagonist is not so much a character or a person, but rather an idea or an organization or an internal struggle between the protagonist and themselves, or the protagonist and nature. Some examples, an example of a person that is an antagonist would be Hindley in Wuthering Heights. And an example of an antagonist that is more of an idea is the capital or classism in The Hunger Games, which the protagonist, Katniss, fights against. Next, we have foils. So, foils are two characters whose qualities, either their personality, their morality, their looks, contrast one another. Foils are used to emphasize the qualities of their opposite character. It could be a protagonist and antagonist who are polar opposites, or it could be two protagonist characters or two antagonist characters that are used to identify the different traits between one another. Some good examples are Romeo and Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, and Lizzie and Lydia Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. So next we have a dynamic character. This is a character who undergoes a significant change in outlook, motivation, personality, or something else throughout a story. Major characters, complex characters, and protagonists are almost always dynamic. Typically, the plot of the story revolves around the dynamicness of the character. Their change that they go through is typically a huge plot point. Some good examples are Amy March in Little Women and Billy in Slaughterhouse-Five. Next, we have a static character. This is a character who remains completely constant throughout a story. Static characters undergo no changes to their outlook, perception, morals, or motivation. Some examples are Jo in Great Expectations and Gale in The Hunger Games. Static characters are typically minor characters, but they don't have to be. Um, in some cases, they are actually major characters. Next, we have stock character. This is a character who is defined by a specific and very recognizable stereotype. Stock characters are easily recognizable to readers as a certain type of character, and they're familiar and obvious to the reader. Some examples of that could be a dumb blonde or a strict teacher, or some specific examples are Fezzik in The Princess Bride, who fits into the dumb giant or the friendly giant idea, and Piggy in Lord of the Flies, which fits into the nerd that gets bullied by the bullies in the story. Next, we have an anti-hero. So this is personally my favorite type of character. So this is a hero or protagonist that lacks the typical and recognizable traits of a protagonist. An anti-hero is unorthodox, they may be untrustworthy and have questionable morals, and anti-heroes are often dynamic. I personally think that anti-heroes are my favorite, just because they're so unexpected and interesting, and although they are becoming a little bit more mainstream, I still think they can be done super well. It's always fun to have an unexpected character in the expected role. Some examples are Han Solo in Star Wars: A New Hope, if you're a Star Wars fan, or Jay Gatsby in The Great Gatsby. Both examples of main protagonist characters that don't necessarily fit into those heroic qualities. Next, we have a tragic hero. This is a protagonist who is destined for downfall, suffering, or defeat. Tragic heroes are often victims of their own will, desire, hamartia, or heroism. They garner the reader's sympathy and sorrow. A really obvious example is one that I think everybody knows now, which is Oedipus in Oedipus Rex. And another for the Star Wars fans would be Anakin Skywalker in the Star Wars prequels. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the handout. So, if you are familiar with the characters in the Harry Potter series, this will be a really good activity for you. If you are not familiar with those characters, that's okay. You can pick a different book that or movie that you're interested in, and that you're more confident about, and go ahead and use those characters. So, if you want to pause the lesson now and try and fill out that worksheet, and then we can get back together and review in just a moment. Okay, so to review the worksheet, so in the example column there, you see major characters is Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, Voldemort, Hagrid, and Dumbledore. So what I have filled in for minor characters is Oliver Wood, Mr. Filch, Dolores Umbridge, Crabbe and Goyle, and Cho Chang. Next, our complex characters would be Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, Sirius Black, Hagrid, and of course there are, you may have different examples in each of these columns. It's not, a perfect science, but hopefully it sort of helps you practice this idea and get these words into your brain. So next we have our flat characters. So that'll be Mr. Filch, Dolores Umbridge, Oliver Wood, and Crabbe and Goyle. Then our protagonist, of course, is Harry Potter, and our antagonist, of course, is Lord Voldemort. Some examples of foils. You could either choose Harry and Draco, as they have a lot of opposite traits, or you could choose Harry and Tom Riddle, which might be a little bit more of a stretch, but it is interesting to think of them sort of as foils since they had really similar upbringings but turned out totally differently, one as the protagonist and one as the antagonist of the story. Next, we have our dynamic characters. Harry Potter is, of course, the protagonist and the biggest example, but I think one of the most interesting examples of a dynamic character is Neville Longbottom, who goes from being, you know, a total coward and not knowing exactly what he's doing to actually saving the lives of all of his peers in the end of the series. Next, we have our static characters. That'll be Mr. Filch, Crabbe and Goyle, Professor McGonagall, Dumbledore, and Draco. And then we have our anti-hero. This is one of the best examples of an anti-hero, which is Severus Snape. He does end up being a hero in the end of the story, but all throughout the story, you really do not expect that of him, as he is, I mean, honestly, one of the big antagonists of the story from Harry's point of view. Next, we have our tragic hero, which is Harry, as he is prophesied to die in the end of the book. Um, and then we have our stock characters. We have Hagrid, who is an example of the gentle giant, Professor McGonagall, who is an example of the stereotypical strict professor, Dolores Umbridge, who is just an example of like the stock sweet but evil character, which is so interesting. And then Dumbledore, who is our stock professor or headmaster of a school, who's old and wise. Alrighty, so thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you guys soon. I hope everyone does really well in the exam.